Is it on? Is it on? Folks, he's in TV land. Again, what we're doing here is, for those of you that might not still be getting the full hour that we're taping each time, is the first part of the evening we're having these read, which are known as Kyroots said, they're one-liners and little stories and etc. And now we're having people who are here while we're doing the taping are sending up little notes. We have a thing that counts the pages when they're read, and they're asking for additional comments, and that's what we're trying to do. We're not trying to, we are. But we're trying to catch up, which we're not. Well, we're not TF thus far. Before we hit them, I want to pick up one little thing from a few nights, from a couple of nights ago when we were taping. I started mentioning, based upon some of the Kyroots, about how things do not exist in man's intellectual secondary world without opposition. And I was using a contemporary example that had come up of a recently deceased famous painter's wife suing his psychiatrist over sketches that her late husband had done and given to the psychiatrist, and now the psychiatrist is intending to publish them as some of the lost work of this famous painter. And she is, of course, trying to protect her own vested interests, with nothing wrong with that, and claiming that it was privileged information, that he actually did it as a patient and gave it to the doctor, and anyway, that he shouldn't do it. And I was pointing out how opposition always comes about. But there was one little part that is, even since you've had a few nights, is a little even more obscure and less connected to everyday thinking, but it's this. The reality is always there, but people do not think about it. There's no need to analyze it. And that is, we'll just have to assume, since this happened and I heard about it, and if I heard about it, you heard about it, it's in public news, then I was going to say we're assuming that these sketches that no one knew about, generally, the art world did not, they did not know about until the psychiatrist expressed his intention to publish them. So we'll assume on that basis that for some reason life, secondary life now, having nothing to do with the necessary basics to keep you alive or humanity alive at the physical level, but on some secondary level, we'll assume now that life wanted, that life needed these sketches to come out. Now, what I want you to consider, had it not been for the opposition of his wife, do you understand that they might not have surfaced? Do you follow? And don't get involved, of course, with any judgment about, well, they're a bunch of crap. That's not it. If they're not coming out in apparently meaningless opposition, and it can be that your attitude was, all art's meaningless, who cares whether they can publish anything they want to, I'm not going to, it doesn't matter. For whatever reason, no matter how fleeting the moment, life in some way needed this to come out. Maybe it was just to fill in 5 minutes or 3 minutes on the network news. There's a human interest story last week or whenever it came out. But life needed it. Life needed these sketches, or at least the story of them, to surface. Do you understand? If the psychiatrist said, well, I'm going to publish these sketches, and I haven't seen them, but we'll assume maybe they were just rough things that the guy did, and maybe he was in some upset state. If his wife, his estate, had not opposed it, if they had not heard about it, I'm sure the publisher contacted the estate once the psychiatrist submitted them for consideration. That some publisher said, well, would you write her forward, or did you know about these? And she immediately began, her and the estate, to oppose their publication. Do you then understand that they might not have surfaced, they might not have become, even no matter how ephemerally they were so, for an hour or whatever length of time in the secondary world, but they might not have even made it there had it not been for the opposition. Do you understand that the opposition itself, no matter how, from some particular view, how foolish, meaningless it may have been to you or to some observer, that had the opposition not happened, the actual appearance, which is a form of existence in the secondary world, would not even happen. Therefore, you've got the opposition. Or if you're back to crude religious times, it's like, that the guys, the good forces, could not produce anything were it not for the cooperation of the bad guys, unless they got and said, wait a minute, don't do that. That the good guys said, let's have good means of transportation. The bad guy says, well, all right, buses. Something like that. And you can say, well, they didn't contribute anything. They may have contributed the absolute necessary minimum/maximum to even make it come into existence. That as the opposition itself is what helped produce it. And connected to that, sort of. But enough for me to bring it up. We were talking about, there was a Kyroot that same night that I didn't even get to. That in the secondary world, just paraphrasing it, that things have a tendency to whatever they're called to become the thing. And you can fly off with all kinds of strange philosophical ideas with that, but consider it, this is not disconnected from what I was just talking about. Once something has become part of the ordinary world and it's been named, there is no despair, no one seems to care when it is proved to be otherwise. Does everyone, most of you are old enough to remember, whenever it was, in the late 60s, the great headline saying, British expedition conquers world's tallest peak, Mount Everest. And it was all over the news, and the British expedition and their local assistants there in Nepal, everyone became famous. But then it took, whatever it was, 20 years, use satellite photographs, and they find out that Mount Everest was not the world's tallest peak. K2 is, which for years was considered number 2, but now there's, from the kind of satellite triangulation, but notice, no one cares. Now think about it. And I could take an ordinary view, I could make an argument and say, well, and I could respond to it, but still think about it. Sir Edmund is still famous. They still recall it. There's still history. Even people talking about contemporaneous on television and the news programs will still refer to the great expedition of conquering the world's greatest peak, when in fact, and I'm just taking their word for it, I'm just repeating, when in fact, the same people who wrote the news, that is the collective wisdom, the secondary world of man, when they say so-and-so on such and such date conquered, reached the world's highest peak, and that's shown that that was not true. In a sense, there is no despair. In a sense, that has not changed. It gets subtle. Well, it gets real plain is one reason it becomes a kind of bullet that the king doesn't want to hear about, if you remember. It's a bullet fired at a gun. Don didn't misread it. And there was one other I can't resist pulling in right quick. From a night or so ago, somebody may have asked about it, but Kyroots was mentioning, and this is connected, the only reason I'm doing them all before I get to the rereading them, the ones you requested, about the historical, it's thousands of years old in case you thought that you just heard about it when you were growing up, about people saying that the minister's son or daughter, the minister's children, is always the biggest troublemaker in town. Kyroot put it about the priest children tend to become religious rebels, but Kyroots point out, which is a sign that their genetic line is trying. Consider, I mean, this is just the Greeks, to use a Western example, were writing about this same thing 3,500 years ago, that it was surprising, they thought, that in any particular neighborhood, in any city, the biggest troublemaker, the biggest juvenile delinquent, by God, you can almost count on, is going to be the priest's son. This makes subtle seem like an overweight 18-wheeler. So you got to listen fast, because you can explain that psychologically. That is, you can explain it from an ordinary view. You can do it. Don't have to right quick. You can say, well, someone attempting to, someone that thinks they're a religious person, a minister, a priest, a rabbi, that's always hounding about do good and living by some kind of stringent morals, it's not surprising that one of their kids is going to rebel just for the sake of, I don't want to hear more of that crap, and so they end up, if that particular priest and his religion is, for instance, against all forms of drugs and alcohol, anything like, well, it's not going to be surprising. You just about count on one of the kids is going to end up being a drunk, just, as a rebel. And you can go, yeah, and walk off. You ain't no revolutionist, though, if you walk off. It's more subtle than that, and it's more direct than that. You don't hear it? At first you could say, from one view, that those involved with religion, seriously, a priest, somebody doing it for a living, as a calling. From one view you could say, well, they're as far removed from this kind of unfocused, unstructured, blasphemous, in a humorous sense, this kind of revolutionist activity, you could say, well, somebody involved seriously in religion is about as far removed from this as possible. No. It could be and it might not be, but in general they're not. So why are their children so prone to almost be anti-religious, at least rebellious? Don't think about it as actually being anti-religious, but seem to be rebelling. If you can see beyond what the ordinary tend to call psychological, try and look at it in a molecular, look at a genetic, at a good DNA level, that here you got, let's go back 2 or 3 generations to the Smith family. And, maybe for a while they were horse thieves, and then smithies, and then carpenters. I'm trying to make it sound like it's some kind of progression, but... and then it comes along, and maybe the grandfather is the first one to become actually educated and become literate, and he gets interested in reading religious books, and then perhaps the father, back one generation, actually becomes a priest or rabbi or minister. And then the child, the one we're talking about now, the contemporary one, is a rebel against religion. Do you not see? Genetically, hormonally, that's like progress. They're like the priest father, the minister father. This new kid that's now a religious rebel is like his best shot. He's getting better. He's getting more like the revolution. He's getting more up to date. And yet from any ordinary view, you don't have to be religious, you just have to agree. Somebody said, isn't it a shame how Pastor Smith's, Reverend Smith's son has become a drunk, never attends service, is knocked up 4 women. There's a cow we got some suspicions about. But isn't it a shame? Isn't it a shame the child is just completely out of hand, and it appears to be a negative observation. And as I said, you don't have to be religious. That you'd have to ordinarily you'd hear and go, well, yeah, I'm not religious, but it is. He is not a chip off the old block. Aha! There's no way to see it. It is progress. His genetic line, that particular little stream, is actually progressing. Because it went from being a horse thief and a smithy and a carpenter into actually being a man of God, a man of religion. And then after that, his child becomes a person rebellious to religion. And it appears to be, from any ordinary view, well, it's kind of a sidetrack, a step down. No. It's a sign that genetic line is trying hard. It's actually improving and doing something. Just for anybody, well, here we go. Trying to catch up now. To be funny, trying to catch up. Then we're done. All right, here we go. Maybe what we should do, some of you guys, maybe I'll think of it, is bring a rhythm machine so I can cut it on and and have that going behind when I start. Or maybe where I can switch it, maybe turn it up a little bit. That is the tempo. Now here we go. Number 5. I repeat, some of these, there's no offense to you asking, but some of them, I'll go ahead and read them, everyone that somebody requests, but some of them I'm not going to really say anything about, which is saying something about them. And Kyroots said, a child particularly sensitive to the visual aspects of life notes, I guess it's probably a good thing that our mental posture cannot be seen. Yeah. I'm just going on to read the next one. And Kyroots said, ordinary success is like winning a race sailing due south from Australia. Think about that. No offense to any particular geographical part of this fine, fine planet. Success. What kind of success would that be, those of you that have some notion of geography? And, as always, may I suggest on Kyroots' behalf, it has actually more to do than open sea racing and perhaps going further down the latitudes past even Tasmania and New Zealand down to areas that are not known as being a clarion call for summer vacations. And yet, if the race took off from Australia and the general directions were, all right, everyone, it's going south, and they point out some particular latitude at which time will be success, or some particular landfall, and they said, there it is. So you could go, follow it, and be the first one to the designated finish line and win. It'd be success. The inference being, I assume all of you got a general idea. If you're sailing due south, the point of success, the destination is going to be, assuming it's not mid-ocean somewhere, it's going to be somewhere in Antarctica. You can move back and forth from an intellectual to the primary physical world, can't you? Is that success? Well, if they say it's success, if they say the finish line, if they say the finish line is the northeast edge at some particular, compass point, that is success. And it's in Antarctica. All right? If you get there, it's success. And life says it's success. They may have CNN there and they some champagne and go, hooray! But assuming that you're a decent sort, except for those of you living in Canada and other weird places, are you going to consider that Antarctica is a real boon to my life? I mean, all my life I've saved, gone without extra meals, just so I could save up and take a trip to Antarctica. And yet, in life, whatever the secondary world says is success, it's success. It's their game. Huh? Of course, then if you want to get past what Kyroots said and ocean trips and secondary world, how about you? And of course, if you are ordinary, you say, yeah, I got some weird ideas of what success is, but it's not my fault. My parents and life put it into me. Well, bless your heart. Well, I'm just heartbroken to hear about this. But we've got to go on. I'm sorry I had some more time. I'm just going to read the part of this. I don't think we'll say anything, but the punchline. And Kyroots said, being civilized is like an operational substitute for thinking. All right, I will say something. Well, crap. Should I? What is being civilized to ordinary people? Now, you can explain all kinds of ways, and Kyroots made all kinds of little observations, but in a quite real sense, in the sense of looking at life as being the primary and the secondary, and it being at least discrete enough vis-a-vis one another to talk about, then being civilized to ordinary people is a substitute for thinking, in the sense that we use it. That is, of thinking more than you have to. That's part of what being civilized is. It's part of what having laws, having moralities, the whole 9 yards. If anybody ever figures out for sure what 9 yards means, I'm tired of bringing these cheap guesses as to what it means. The whole ball of wax, whatever the hell that means. How about a ball of wax rolled up in the whole 9 yards and put out in the sun with the American pie or in MacArthur's Park, and then worry about what it means. Being civilized is like an operational, that is collective, secondary. It is like a substitute for revolutionist thinking. I'm not going to tell you what I'm doing. Somebody might be offended. And Kyroots said, all mystical experiences held in the ballroom are of a muscular variety. The ballroom, in a sense, of course, I'm having to do this fast, is sort of a metaphor, I'm guessing, being as close as I am to Kyroots at times, and they let him out of the home, that the ballroom is sort of representing ordinary life, the secondary world. Think about all the literature, in fact, by some views, mystical experiences in the broadest sense, unusual intellectual experiences are like the avant-garde of civilized thinking and life. Kyroots pointing out that all of these, when they happen at the ordinary level, no matter what people say, ordinary people come back and write books. I say come back that their minds seem to have gone off on a stroll, and it comes back. They may say their soul, their spirit, but it's their brain. And they come back, and they say, my God, and they begin to write hundreds, thousands of pages over the mystical experience and how they tingled, the bright lights the flashes in their head and etc. Kyroots simply pointing out that all such mystical experiences that happen to ordinary people, whatever they're called, are of a muscular variety. That's where it resides. Anybody who has any doubt, and I'm not trying to, of course, talk anyone out of having one if you're hard up for a hobby. But a cure, well, looks at it from another view. An absolute bar, a direct interference with all such ordinary mystical experience is, in fact, you need any proof of this, to immediately undertake some physical exercise. That is, any time, if you just want it for an experiment, let's say you're the type that can, you have mystical experiences. So let's say, once a day, so it's no big deal if you miss a day. Next time you're about to have one, jump up and start lifting weights. Go out for a run and you'll see. Of course, you're ordinary, you'll explain it away. Or if nothing else, you'll say, well, screw this kind of stuff. It's interfering with my mystical life. I'm just saying if you want an experiment. If you just wanted to find out that Kyroots right again. And Kyroots said, in that invisible, unheard of school, where they teach you how to be a cityite, that is, how you're becoming civilized, they, being nobody, the collective, that is, if you want to look at it from another Kyroot tonight, it might be the dam of which the water is never aware. But they, the dam collective, they immediately dispense these two important lessons. Count them. First is always emphasize the last word in your sentence. And secondly, only deal and talk to people who can appreciate this. Or if you want on a broad level, why would you even associate with civilized people if they're not going to understand civilized behavior? Why are you going to talk to secondary people if they cannot appreciate secondary intelligence? Why would a bus try and converse with a pig? Well, according to where your allegiances lie, you can reverse it either way. But buses of a feather flock together. And this was a letter to the advice doctor. Dear doctor, how come the primary world we've got sex, which is where we have an activity that comes darn close to actually providing an immediate feeling of conclusiveness. That is, for any sane person, when sex is, I shouldn't have to say good, when sex is just sex. All right, when sex is good or decent, it's at least a feeling like, well, right then you don't want any more. It's almost like a conclusion to something, the guy says. And let's just go ahead and agree for the sake of assuming that you people are fairly sane. How come in the primary world we've got sex where we have an activity that comes darn close to actually providing an immediate feeling of conclusiveness, and yet we have no such counterpart in our intellectual secondary world? And the doctor says, are you sure? Of course, that was an ordinary letter writer. You can assume that he said, are you sure, for your benefit? And Kyroots said, while you were out, Mr. Optimus left this message, quote, in the secondary world, sustained efforts count almost as much as spotty spasmodic ones. Which, I guess, I thought was self-evident. Probably whoever asked for that just didn't hear it correctly the first time. That's another one of the benefits, I cannot stress too strongly, being on their payroll, of the benefits of the secondary world. Where else? Well, here's somebody else for the one that I just mentioned. And Kyroots said, etc. In secondary kingdoms, the measurement and assessment of a thing becomes the thing. I didn't even quote exactly, but how about that? Back to the measurement of Mount Everest. And you can't laugh. That serves no purpose to say, well, they should have known better. What, they had done much? What little I know about, they had done their best shot. The sciences of the day. That was as recent, it was in the 60s. And they considered K2, that mountain. Wasn't that far away, and they kept looking, whatever measurements they were using, that Mount Everest, the measurement of a thing, in this case, Mount Everest, they named it, the measurement, the assessment, it's the world's tallest peak. It's the highest point on this planet. And so, men being what they are, stamp collecting being slow during the 60s, everybody begins to rush and they won't climb it so they can say, I was the first one there. That is the measurement and the assessment. And it's not just the mountain, it's the measurement and the assessment, because that's a noun. Mount Everest doesn't amount to squat until men become involved, until the noun takes on a verbal aspect. And I don't mean talk, until it begins to be not just a goods, it becomes part of a service. It's no longer just a noun, a thing, it becomes a verb, action. And so the nature, the assessment, and the measurement is not just of Mount Everest. The naming, the assessment, is now men climbing it. And the ultimate measure and assessment from a secondary view will be when some man conquers this. So Mount Everest doesn't mean anything. I mean, you can look at it or you get heard about it, but it only exists because men become involved. And I don't mean just measuring it and assessing it. That was just the beginning. Once they measured and assessed, and they all decided, we have measured, we have assessed it, it's the world's tallest peak, and nobody's climbed it. Let's climb that son of a bitch. Then it takes on a life. And it became that. It was measured and assessed as being the world's tallest peak, the highest point on this planet. So it was. Except we know now, according to them, it's not. But big deal. Did they go back and write the history books? Is Sir Edmund Hillary, if he's not dead already, is he now subject to extremely bad posture? Does he now have to go around and apologize every time he's introduced and say, and here he is, sir, after he climbed it? Remember that? Did the Queen, ask for his title back? And they found, wait a minute, Mount Everest wasn't the tallest, and I gave you a peerage for no reason. Give that sir back. She didn't do that. He doesn't have to apologize, and they say, and here he is, the first man to climb the world's tallest peak, Sir Edmund Hillary. He didn't have to come and say, come on, folks, I'm sorry, but I didn't. And everybody go, oh, and feel bad, or else those things, you mean that was some kind of farce? No. Oh, we really got 2 or 3 more minutes?
Yeah.
Okay, well, tell me absolutely, I don't want to mess with we don't want to affect.
As far as the cable, we've run out of time, but we've got...
Well, okay. In that case, bye. I'm trying to keep it in those perimeters, all right? Those parameters for you people in Alabama. In that case, start telling me again for sure when the actual cable time, whatever it is, 50, what is it really? Is it 60 minutes?
59 minutes.
Okay. From now on, absolutely tell me. Because I want to get these on since they're connected with what's already been read, right? Okay.